All right, cool. We're here with Matt Presti. Matt is an artist, musician, philosopher, writer, etc. Fireman, right? Family man. He's everything. So he was the president of University of Science and Philosophy for 7 years, and he has been instrumental for me personally in introducing me to the Russell stuff and the world as well, and helping comprehend the teachings of Walter Russell on such a level that the average person can really get a hold of it, because it's such an advanced teaching that when you find it, you feel like it is the truth, which it is, but really deeply comprehending it just off of his words and diagrams alone is extremely challenging. So yeah, because of Matt, I was able to comprehend it. And if it wasn't for Matt, I would still be wondering what the still magnetic light is, trying to figure that out. So, and it's also just a surreal moment for me, because when I found the material over 10 years ago, I didn't think there would be anyone even talking about it on YouTube, or I went to find some more answers, but there was. And I found the Exploration of Consciousness series that Matt did. And that's what really helped me comprehend this material and the new language that Russell uses. So it's a full circle moment for me to be able to talk with Matt today. I did not see that one coming. So yeah, Matt, thanks for coming, dude. Thanks for talking.
Thank you, Kyle, for the invite.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks for coming, man. We did talk a couple times on Twitter, which is funny. And you kind of serendipitously showed up one day randomly when I was running a space, and we had a really deep conversation just out of nowhere. Yeah.
Right.
So ever since then, I've been feeling like, I want to have like a more like a one-on-one chat and go deep into like a discussion. But I did have a couple questions, and then I want to just go right into it. So
sounds good.
Yeah. So the question is, who was Matt Presti, BR, which is before Russell, and who has Matt become, AR, after Russell?
Oh, the timeless questions, right? Well, I was pretty much somebody that was on a mission to figure out reality. And as opposed to being satisfied with like the New Age movement and just a various host of authors in the early 2000s up to about 2008 when I read The Secret of Light, I was doing comparative mythology and religious studies. I was done with Christianity because I felt like it, especially Christians I knew, weren't really authentic, you could say. A lot of them were, well, we'll sin 6 days a week and be forgiven on the seventh, and then we can continue to sin next week after that. It was sort of too much of a seesaw for me. And, I guess in the early 2000s, I looked around at my friendship circle and said, it's time to get some new friends. And so I started studying and researching pretty in-depthly, beginning around, 9/11 really was a big moment. But back in the late 90s, I had started my first research with a book by Dr. Alan Cantwell Jr. called AIDS and the Doctors of Death. And that was at the recommendation of a previous best friend's dad who passed, but great guy who really helped ignite a desire to start reading again in my mid to later 20s, which I basically, because of school, really was turned off by reading, because we were assigned reading, assignments that just didn't appeal to me. And it was like torture, having to read these books and do book reports. And so my first book I read on my own account, on my own desire, was called Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky, and it was a biography about Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
And that was actually something that inspired me because it had musical connotations, of course, and one of the great guitar players of the time. And then I started to, I read The Hobbit. Everybody reads that in their teens. That was probably the second book of my own accord that I, went through. And then I didn't read for like 7 years, anything. I just sort of dwelled in the body in my early to mid 20s, partying with the guys,
Oh yeah.
the strip club when we felt like it, when we were really feeling wild. And then I just, after like what did I go? I don't know, 5 or 6 trips to the strip club when we turned 21, and I never went again. I'm just like, this is boring, I didn't even like all the guys are sitting there with their dollars. I went and sat at the bar, and I kept getting hit on by all the waitresses. It's like, I'm in the wrong spot. Maybe I should go sit down at the table. But anyways, it was just, you do what you do with the crowds you run with, and that's who we were. Fiery, filled with hormones, guys in our 20s. Half of us had significant others, didn't know the first thing about love, things of that nature. So I grew up, I got into reading, thankfully, to this friend of mine. He turned me on to Dr. Alan Cantwell Jr.'s book, and I think John Rappaport wrote the foreword to that. And so then I'm reading about C. Evans Wentz's Sacred Sites, the Seven Sacred Mountains. It was a German translation. So I'm getting more into this, and then, as things unfold, get a computer in 1998, and I start surfing the internet, and then I discover, when I was a kid, I always checked out the Bigfoot books and the UFO books and the Loch Ness Monster books from the library. I'd check them out 3 or 4 times in a row. My mom would be like, how can you read the same book 5 times? I'm like, because I still don't know what this all means. I'm trying. It's a mystery, right? I've always been interested in mysteries, but as things progress, 2001, 9/11, of course, that was huge because I bought into the whole, we need to bomb the Middle East, psychological
official story
manual. Yeah, the official narrative, and having gone through that and come out of it just couple months after the event, due to a friend who said, you need to take a look at this, and what you're saying is just off the wall. He asked me what should we do with the Middle East, and I said nuke it out of existence. That's how, that is just like turn it into a reflective pool or a parking lot. And then he goes, you would nuke innocent women and children. And he's a former Navy badass.
Wow.
And I'm just like, well, yeah. And he's like, dude, there's something wrong with you. If you do that, I don't even want to talk to you anymore. And he hung the phone up on me. But before he hung up, he goes, you need to research Building 7. And then he hung the phone up.
Wow.
So
Shout
for 3 days, 3 days, I'm head inside the computer reading everything I can find about 9/11. And then David Icke's book came out, the biggest, the 9/11 conspiracy, and all the facts and names and figures, which he's always been good at.
Biggest secret, maybe? I forget.
What's that?
The Biggest Secret, I think it was. I forget the title of that one.
It was after that. Biggest Secret was the reptilians and all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I have a whole nother story about that. But this was the 9/11 Alice in Wonderland and the 9/11 conspiracy. And I read that, and of course that came out just a few months after, I believe. But I had already been through the Building 7 thing, and for 3 days I didn't sleep a wink. And then that's when I realized that, my God, I did say things that weren't becoming of a human being, Obviously, there's people who have agendas, and then there's your human side. And to get along in this world, we have to adopt certain views. We have to not tolerate certain things, but also learn to be tolerable. And until I discovered Russell, I wouldn't know that there's this balance that can be that you're right in the middle of this stuff, and you don't have to buy into either political party or I need to be with this group versus that group. You sort of really stand alone, and you can decide for yourself which things you'll belong to, because you're ahead of the body versus being behind it. It's like riding the wave on a surfboard. When you've got that sweet spot and you're on your balance point, then everything is a decision for the future versus being pulled along by some effect of motion. That's what I call vertical thinking, vertical awareness, I should say. When you go from a horizontal dual brain hemisphere, always back and forth, the self-argument, should I do this or should I not? And then you're arguing with yourself in your head, listing things, pros and cons, and deliberating. But when you get off the seesaw and you turn your awareness vertical, and then you command your seesaw from your still point of balance. It's the knowing behind the motion versus the motion trying to know the motion, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that would eventually lead me, that led me on to, bigger and greater things, studying. When I realized how foolish I was in 2001, I said, never again am I going to be taken in by this media. The media had us all fooled. And that's the whole thing, the acknowledgement that there's such a powerful psychological warfare apparatus called media, but they're not the only media in the world. This is media here. And you can do just like a gun. It's not the gun's fault if somebody gets hurt by it. It's the person who wields it. So who wields the media is the question. And there's a lot of people now that have chosen to become their own media and to wield it in ways that help uplift their fellow man instead of tearing them down. So again, it's all an act of balance at the end of the day, but you certainly can do great things with the technology we have in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I resonate with all that so much. I was in 5th grade.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't start researching that until a little bit later, but luckily I had a teacher in high school, and his name was Mr. Smith, Bruce Smith. And he decided to show us like the Pentagon, and he was like, does that look like a plane to you guys?
Sounds like a cool teacher.
Oh yeah, beyond blessed, man. So then because of him and having us start questioning those things, I was already kind of anti-authority to begin with. So once I was able to sniff that I had been believing lies all my life, basically, that really just sent me into like a frenzy of research. After I did the JFK assassination as my grad project and found out that was a scam as well. That was it. That's pretty much where I started. So I started in the same place with the conspiracies and finding out that, the world that we live in is not the world that they say we live in. So, and then from there, and then also with psychedelics, that also made me start thinking a lot and being introspective and trying to find answers, because I had actually become like an atheist during this time too, because I was raised like with just regular Christian and also like actually Catholic until I was like 9 or 10. But my dad was like, no, we're not doing that, because he's also like an independent type researcher, just trying to find the truth for himself.
Right.
Never aligned with any kinds of organizations because they had also burned him in the past. So, yeah, luckily I had those experiences and then just really started thinking. And just through finding things like Terence McKenna, lectures like that, about the true nature of reality, I just couldn't get enough of it. So I just went straight off the deep end into trying to find out what's really going on. So, yeah, I resonate with your story. Big time.
Yeah, I went through a McKenna phase. I read all his work. My friend Mike Hagan, whose forum is the first place I ever heard the name Walter Russell.
Wow.
I used to type these really long replies, and there's a fellow from Canada named Hemp Penance, and he goes, dude, you sound like Walter Russell. I'm like, who the hell is that? This is like 2006, and
Wow.
I was new to forums, but I had a lot to say. Really raw, really novice, beginner level. But he still just gave me that comment, and then he dropped a link to philosophy.org. I remember going there and looking at it. I'm like, what is this? This colorful drawings. It wasn't a nice presentation of the artwork of Russell. It was pretty drab, actually. A WordPress Army green template with order link to order books, and I'm just like, it kind of looks almost cultish to me. So I just bowed out. I wasn't ready. And then the near-death experience happens in late 2006 ish, and next thing you know, a couple days after that, discover The Secret of Light for $2 used in a used bookstore.
Unbelievable.
And it would be a year and a half or so later that I would actually read it. And I'm actually doing a series on my Substack that I just started on. It's called Reflections on the Secret of Light. And I felt like I should do that for posterity, for my kids and grandkids, so that they can have old Grampy's personal interpretations of a book that's life-changing. And it's like C.S. Lewis, when he read George MacDonald's Fantastes, it utterly transformed his life. It's a book about fairies, and I haven't even read it yet, but I did order it. It got here a couple months back. But when I see something like that, like a C.S. Lewis, and he's telling us that he passed this book multiple times at the bookstore, at least 12 times. It was just the everyday man's version, paperback, I guess, is what the everyday man's version is. And so he ended up buying it, and he credits that with his return to Christianity and his ability to draw forth the creative powers to write Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and his multiple other books. Wow. It also influenced the author of Peter Pan, J.R.R. Tolkien was heavily influenced by it. And if you removed George MacDonald from the world, there would be no Lord of the Rings or Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe or Peter Pan or in fact, Mark Twain himself was influenced by it, and that could have been the impetus for some of his greater works. But yeah, it's amazing. George MacDonald, yeah, M.A.C. Donald.
And it was what was it?
Fantastes.
Fantastes.
It's P with a P-H. P-H-A-N Tasties.
Awesome.
And yeah, that's
beautiful.
Very interesting story, because again, it's the reason I'm drawing a parallel here is that you're fortunate in life if there's a book that comes across to your awareness and it has life-changing effects. Well, that was The Secret of Light for me. And so that's the point of the series, is to just give my reflections on it. And maybe it'll help some people, maybe it won't, but it's just going to be nice, because I've only read the book twice, and this will actually be the third time I've gone through it, but I'm going through it line by line, and I've got all kinds of notes in it, and scribblings and page markers and things like that. So I'm going to give a real personal experience as to how certain passages affected me. And again, it's when I finished it, I closed it, and Lori looks over and she says, "How was it?" And my famous words, I never need to read another book as long as I live.
That is the correct response.
That was it. I'm like, this dude knows everything he's saying. I've known in my heart since I was a little kid when it comes to nature. I used to run around in the woods when I was little and hide under the honeysuckle bushes alone. I'd sing to God. I'd climb the oak tree in the backyard. I'm 100 feet up in the air, holding on to this branch, swinging 3 feet this way in the wind, 3 feet that way, just singing away like a little bird, like a little songbird. Didn't even know how I got up there. My parents were horrified. My dad, he actually bought me the rope so that I could swing off the garage and climb up to get to the first branch, which was like 20 feet off the ground. This oak tree would take 4 people with their hands spread out.
Holy moly.
So, and then I read in Walter's own illumination experience that he had his favorite oak. So I'm just like, that's cool, man. That's a synchronicity, you know. But so I had a meaningful oak tree of my own that I literally, when I was little, 9 years old, was called to the top of that tree by my still small voice, and in ecstasy, and everything looked so little from up there. And of course, my mom, like I said, was horrified. She looks up, sees this little dot in the sky swinging in the wind. She's like, Matthew, you get down from there right now. And I remember coming out of like my little mini illumination there, and I was in the light, brother. That there was no up there just singing. And I remember looking down, and for the first time of climbing that tree, and I probably climbed it 2 or 3 times before she come out looking for me. But I remember looking down and just fear gripped my heart. I'm like, how the I didn't cuss then, but how the hell did I get up here? Number one, and number two, how am I going to get down? Right.
Yep.
So I remember like being in that ecstatic state, and suddenly it came back to me, and I didn't have the fear anymore, even though she was still down there. She was talking, I couldn't hear her. All I had in my mind was foot here, hand here, I'll take you down.
Yep. Yep.
And I got down to the bottom, and she grabbed me by my ear. You stay out of that tree. Don't you ever, you almost gave me a heart attack. You know. And of course I went right back up the next day, at least 10 or 12 more times.
Yeah. I'm not done with that yet.
Yeah. And then I started exploring the underground as a kid, the sewer tunnels and all the other stuff. It's, mapping those out, and the caves. And so I've always been outdoorsy, especially as a kid. I was always running and hiding from the rest of the world, to be alone. And now I got my man cave here. So.
Oh, yeah.
But I also have a study, again, balance. It's not just a study versus a man cave. It's the best of both worlds, you could say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about that balance right in the middle.
Always
I
comes
resonate
back
with
to
that big time too.
Yeah.
Being in nature, just like I would do the same thing. I would just go into the woods. I'm an only child, so I would just go into the woods and just be alone. And I had no reference for any kind of like God or anything like that. That was never something that was on my mind. Like God was never on my mind. But I did have like that voice within me that I would listen to unknowingly, just listen to that voice. And it would help me, it would just help me do things and be good at things. And I had no idea, really what was going on. But I would always listen to that intuitive feeling that I would get to be alone in the woods. So yeah, when I read Russell talking about nature and being alone and stuff like that, I really like was able to look back and just be grateful for all that time that I spent alone, Yeah.
And to know we have all that time ahead that we can spend,
I know.
I think that's universal in especially every little boy's life. We're tend to be more prone to run in the outdoors or be that wild man, that little wild boy that wants to just run loose in nature, free, and Walter's, one of his first books, The Bending of the Twig, is all about his experiences, his major illuminations and minor ones in the first quarter of his life, where he'd wander in the woods in ecstasy. And that book reflects those experiences. That's sort of the first version, as he called it, of the message of the Divine Iliad. But he didn't have the words yet, but he knew what it was like to run knowingly with God through the woods, if you will.
Yeah.
I think we all get that feeling. It's how do you think the animals and the deer and the geese, and they all have this internal awareness that we might not even recognize anymore, but it's in us as well, and it's called instinct control. I mean, who do you think runs your heartbeat, your digestive system? It's not you thinking about running it. It's God's autopilot system. We couldn't even. I'd forget to have a heartbeat if it was down to my thinking. I'd be so into doing something, I'd probably die from not keeping my heart beating if I had to think about it beating all the time in order for it to beat. But again, Russell called this instinct control, and that's what the animal kingdom works on, the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, all except for humans who have been loosened from the grip of instinct control. And that's why evil exists in this world, because when you're loosened from God control, which is i.e. instinct control, then evil becomes possible at all in the first place. And when I read that, I went, you mean mankind's responsible for evil? Oh, come on, Russell. I'm like, I had an argument with myself about that. I'm like, you got to be kidding. There's a devil. There's got to be a Satan in another dimension, or evil beings, David Icke, these reptilians. And then I came face to face with it one day. And in my experiences with psychedelics, I was trying to get, and this would have been up through about 2011 or so. But in 2007-ish, in there, I had an experience, and I'll just say that it was revealed to me that man is the source of his own evil, and that was a hard one. And then Russell verifies it in his home study course. Man creates his own evil and calls it sin and shame and guilt, And that put the responsibility and the impetus, it took it out of the supernatural and put it squarely on man's shoulders as the cause of his own suffering. And that's when it clicked for me. Every event in my life where I suffered, I instantly knew at that point that I was the cause of it. And that's a hard realization to live with, because now that going forward, you don't get to use the excuse of the devil anymore, and you could call it archetypal, you could call it whatever you want. The need for this external evil is itself evil, because it puts the responsibility on an externalization rather than asking, how do I play a part in my own self-experience? Which evil is an experience of our own self-experience. We have all shot ourselves in our own foot many times in our lives. And if we're honest about it, and not always is it us that, brought it on ourselves. It could be you get robbed at a convenience store or something, which has nothing to do, or maybe it does, I don't know. But there are the multitude, I'd say, if they were honest looking at their own lives, would have to conclude that, yes, I did bring this on myself due to poor choices. And the unbalanced outcome of that unbalanced choice is one that feels evil. And I like to redefine evil. It should have an extra definition underneath it, as opposed to a being in some realm somewhere that was, created to hound man for all eternity. You should have a definition that evil is actually just unbalance. And that explains it. And so the more we commit acts of unbalance, the more evil there is in the world, because then there's a deficit left over at the end that never gets completed. And that thought pattern will repeat eternally until you balance its repetition through awareness of it, which, guess what, voids it.
Exactly.
So literally in a mind wave universe, thoughts are the first half of the action principle. The body is the completion of the thought, is the existence and the being principle. And so the knowing behind it, if it's balanced knowing, the thought will be balanced and the product of the thought will be balanced. If the knowing isn't there and it's just the thought, you're already out of balance, because again, you're on the seesaw, you're on the interplay between the hemispheres, and you can't possibly act with knowing. That's what we call experimenting. That's why people get hurt in the laboratory. Hudson Maxim, who was Walter's close friend, and they used to play tennis together, he was the inventor of smokeless gunpowder, and he blew his right hand off. And Russell told him, if you'd have called me, I'd have told you not to mix those two things together, because the unbalance that's going to occur from it is going to be, you're lucky you didn't lose more than your hand. You know,
Yeah.
could have lost your life. He's like, and he had to learn to play tennis left-handed, and I would beat him all the time, Russell said.
Yeah,
And
his
he was
thinking
just
exceeded
as simple
his
as
knowing.
that. Yeah. As simple as that. I mean, it's just, that's how it comes down not just to the mind, or the thinking, but also the organic, the chemistry of life, the sex nature of the universe. You know, you mix the wrong things together, like you get two people together that are nitrogen and glycerin, you're going to have an explosion. And if you have an ex in your life, you probably
But
have
he's so cute. She's so cute.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But man, you mix the wrong things together and it's just kaboom. But
Yeah, I like to
life
think
is
of
a
that as
balance act for sure.
yeah. Russell is super instrumental in bringing that word balance in and really helping to understand like what that actually means, because we have that tendency to just be like all or nothing. You know, I definitely had that. I definitely had that.
Yeah.
And I thought of a few different things as you were speaking there, in terms of there's no devil, that kind of idea. That's like accepting that is extremely difficult, and accepting that we're the ones that are in control is extremely difficult, because that's the end of victimization and blame, and that's actually the beginning of maturity, right? And spiritual maturity. When we know that we're the ones that are doing it, we're doing it with God, in the sense that that's where our power to do things comes from. But God is not necessarily like doing anything. Like, we're using God to do things with, and then everything that's inflicted on us is not because of God doing anything. That's because of our own ignorance. So, and then the other thing that Russell talked about too was, when I had found that in the beginning, he's like, yeah, everything is good. Okay. That was
That's a
another
hard one.
huge problem. Yeah. And how could it be good? How? So I worked on that one for like a decade at least, until I was able to finally just accept that idea. But it does take a lot of reflection and a lot of, it's funny because Russell talks about, like, I call it sense-based reasoning, which is what you were talking before. And he calls it like deductive logic, which can help you get to the truth, but only if you have that knowledge behind you. Because sense-based reasoning, deductive logic, it's going to like take God out of the equation, but also it could show, using that same logic, you can see the self-evident nature of God. It's everywhere, right, for you to see. So I feel like we can still use logic to get to these conclusions, but it could also be dangerous just using only sense-based appearance to come
Sure.
to come to these conclusions.
Yeah. Well, scientism is definitely an example right there of what just logic and reason alone, without a fulcrum, it's still sense-based reasoning. I call it to what was the word I used for it? Oh, it'll come to me.
No worries.
But yeah, the science is basically stuck in the senses, and only the senses, if the effects of motion are verified by the senses, is it considered science in today's scientism circles. And you have outlandish statements from like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who says, I don't care about the independent scientist. All I care about is consensus. Right. And so that tells you right there, is it not mavericks who brought us the greatest scientific discoveries the world's ever known? Yet he's only concerned with consensus. Consensus never brought anything new. All it brings is the same old, because it's consensus. It's a con. It's
The cons of the senses.
pretty much, yeah. And it's all or none. There's no one, all for one or one for all. It's all for all, and that's it. We don't want the ones that challenge our authority and our spectacles and our institutionalization of all these so-called free-thinking societies and other things that they have. Even their journals are riddled with horse manure, as we've seen and was exposed through brave doctors and the COVID whole psychological warfare operation we unfortunately had to go through together. So yeah, it's the consensus is, in fact, I would say it's probably being challenged more than ever before now, due to the fact that we have certain people that are upsetting the status quo, from government to the military to, sometimes things are on a downward spiral and they can bounce back in a different direction. And it offers, at that point, further insight and possible repair, Because I think, too, being a patriot of a country that is one of the last in the world not to have the New World Order model fully implemented, because of one simple reason. We have the unalienable right given by God to defend ourselves, and that means the ownership of firearms, or we'd already be overthrown. And there's no doubt in my mind, why would we not be overthrown? And so I like to say to people from other countries who like to give political advice, please don't. If you live in a country that banned your own firearms, do not give me political advice, because you're already gone. It'll be I pray it'll be fortunate if a lot of these countries make it out of the holes they're in. But I mean, you're seeing the enactment of a willful destruction of Western civilization. And Western civilization is what produced the Mavericks, not consensus, Mr. Tyson or Mr. Michio Kuku. It was the Mavericks. The founding fathers were Mavericks themselves, be them Freemasons or not. They still understood unalienable rights. You could draw from Scottish common sense realism for their reasons for that, where they looked at reality as reality, and this juxtaposes to Evelyn Underhill's quote that the mysticism, her quote was, "Mysticism is the art of union with reality."
Yeah, I love her stuff.
Yeah, and when you have union with reality, you're capable of the greatest good. When you break from reality and embrace fantasy, which is exactly what scientism is, these multiple dimensions, and anyone wants to check out my Dispelling Dimensional Madness video, it's basically a demolition of this whole idea of a fourth dimension, which led to the fifth and further M11 string theory, 28 different dimensions and more, and they keep finding more every day, but not through reality, through fantasy, which is what Alexis Carrel's Alice in Wonderland was, another brutal takedown, a mockery of this abstract mathematics, which broke from Euclidean realist mathematics and went into some fantasy world of imaginary numbers. That's how they come up with this stuff. They imagine it. That's why Carl, what's his name?
Sagan?
It's Carl Sagan, yeah. I put a clip in there of him saying, let's imagine that this apple is in the fourth dimension. You can't show us an example. You have to always proceed with let's imagine. And he says it multiple times, and I repeated it just so people would get that he's asking you to imagine science and then telling you it's real because it's science, all in the same sentence. Do you catch the contradiction, people? And so the mystic sees through this. The positive mysticism study, which is not an inversion of mysticism. It's the naked version. It is what it is. I mean, this is what you experience as a child when you're running in nature, and the still small voice is so much louder than at any other point. It's louder than when you go to the church or sing in the choir, because it's one-to-one. It's you and reality, and God is the fulcrum of it. And that's, how do you think men can even come to the awareness of unalienable rights if they don't first have the guidance of a still small voice, to tell them right from wrong? It's the moral capacity to notice that as you like to say, things are truly perfect if you can just see it, and all is truly good if you can understand that. But it might take a decade to get what a Russell says when he says it's all perfect, it's all good. We perfectly screw up, don't we?
Perfect, flawless.
Yeah, it's flawless falling over our
madness.
Yeah, we have perfect madness, but why can't we have perfect being or perfect goodness?
Absolutely.
It exists. We just have to gradually become more aware of it. And that's what I think she meant, Underhill, when she said mysticism is the art of union with reality, because those who do it change reality. They're change agents, if you will, and they can do what other people say is impossible. I like Audrey Hepburn saying the very word impossible says I'm possible.
I have a sweatshirt that says it on the front.
There you go.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yep.
Yeah, man, I like to think of that place out there that we get to see. That's fantasy land, because we either believe that the truth is true or we believe that the lie is true. If we believe the lie is true and then we make decisions, the world that we create under the lie, that's not going to be reality, a one-to-one reflection. That's going to be a fantasy, because everything we're doing is based on belief that a lie is true. So I like to think of it that we're not even in, reality yet. Like, reality is going to be, well, we'll be able to call it reality when everyone accepts the truth as what is objectively true and then makes decisions based on that. So yeah, I see it just as total fantasy land, and it just makes sense that the way that it looks, the way it is that it is because of ignorance, which is what I've realized is ignorance, because Russell talked about it all the time. It's just ignorance, and then that awareness is what you need and exactly what you want. So the little mini revelation that I received on ignorance, it's not that we don't believe something, because we have to always believe that something is true. We're always believing in something. It's shifting from believing that a lie is true to believing that the truth is true. And that's also where we get left in terms of having answers, but not having peace. Because that's the thing that I picked up and took me the longest time to get from Russell, was that sense of inner peace that passes understanding. And no matter what we try to do, it's it seems impossible to get that finally. And so what happened to me was realizing that what I'm doing wrong here is I'm accepting that lies are true. I'm accepting that the appearance of the thing is the reality of the thing. And that's not true, because the appearance is the fantasy, even when we end up creating a true fantasy, we could say, rather than this false fantasy, because we can't see reality. That's the other part of the realization, because reality is the thing that doesn't change. That is the undivided stillness where God lives, right? That is the most real thing that we can imagine, and it has nothing to do with appearances whatsoever. So when we buy into that the appearance is the reality, now that causes all the problems, and it takes our peace away. Because I also remember reading Russell's stuff back then, and he would say, my faith is absolute. And I would say, how the hell can you get something like that? How can you have absolute faith? I don't understand. And also, how can all things unlovely, how can you be immune to seeing unlovely things? How can you only see beauty? You have to be lying, right? But no, it's just that level of awareness. It just takes you up to such a degree where you basically see life the way God sees life, and that's through that lens of perfection. So yeah, it's kind of exciting that we're getting to this point where people are starting to recognize the mistake that we're making, and it's giving power to the appearance ultimately, because that's how we get screwed with communism winning again and again and again, and we're just buying into the way things look and giving our power to the way things look, and being afraid to die and things like that, and losing this and losing that because we're identified with the body. Because another problem with accepting that the appearance is the reality, when you look in the mirror, you're going to see your body and you're going to think that that is you, and that is not you. So we're going to be liable to absolute destruction and just making mistakes left and right and victimizing ourselves, all of those kinds of things, not being able to forgive the world, not being able to love the world. So Yeah, Russell was definitely instrumental in in sharing that, but it seems to be like the last hurdle. You can know God is real, but you can still not have peace, and that shouldn't be possible. See, and that's what happened to me. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, and you're talking decades of inner thinking and contemplation to and it doesn't stop there. You don't get to a point like I'm 54 and say, well, I've got it all figured out. That's cool. Let's just keep doing whatever we need to do to you shed layers of, let's just say, what you thought you knew isn't what really is. And that's why they call it ignorance. You ignore reality, right? And the ultimate reality is that none of us would exist if it was not for this omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent force called God. We deify it, we make it, we anthropomorphize it. We say that he sends representatives from time to time. Even Russell will say that he sends messengers at certain epochs, in ages, if you will, to give man knowledge that he desperately needs for the coming age to unfold in a way that stays with the divine purpose of what man is meant to do, which is and has always been to manifest his creator. That's reverence for God, is to manifest, and generally why they call it fine art, because that is the finest art there is. It's the embracing of reality, not the ignorance of it. And you embrace it and you unfold it through your own two strong arms, through music, through writing, poetry, filmmaking. Heck, even there's many wonderful arts, but the fine arts themselves were called fine because they were considered the peak of Western civilization. And, when we ignore the reality of God being the three O's, omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, it's sort of like put our faith into a book versus the living God, which is responsible for your very breathing. And that's the scientific nature of what a Russell brings. It's even beyond Hermeticism, and I mentioned this in my new series, that Russell never even called himself a Hermeticist. I like to say it's very similar to Hermeticism, but it's not that Russell's a genuine Hermeticist. He has very similar parallels with it, and I'll do a review eventually on the Corpus Hermeticum and point out exactly what parts of that writing dovetail and are parallel with the Russell works. There's about 10 or 12 examples throughout that book, the Corpus. But yeah, he never referred to himself as such. He was never a Mason. He was never part of any of these spiritualist movements or organizations. He came by God the way, which was interesting to me, I did when I was little, by a giant oak tree. I had never even read the Bible. My dad encouraged me to take a look at it, but I knew God before the Bible taught me about God. And you can't unknow the Creator just because you read a book, but you can start to believe, as you said, in the fantasy, the non-reality description of God, and then you're left with this judge, that, if you don't come through his only son, which he is, so why not just go through him instead of a anthropomorphized standalone who was boiled down through a bunch of pagan points of teaching, and then you have to go through that in a priesthood in order to, this didn't come to me until later, and I remembered back to my youth. I'm like, I used to know God when I was little, and all the stuff I've read that's confused me and clouded the water here is not the God I remember when I was little, and the freedom that I had as a child. Once I was out that back door, man, you didn't see me until sundown. There'd be times my mom would, should I call the police? He's not back yet, right? But I would explore the neighborhood, the wooded places, run around with friends, things of that nature. We played, it was a state of grace. Playing is the state of grace. And So yeah, it's when a Russell comes along and brings you all this incredible insight, and you start to realize too that the reality of life is much bigger and more meaningful and full of absolute being. I mean, the Creator's perfection is that He's ever present and omnipresent. He's all places at once. Every corpuscle of your body could not even move. No cell would produce any of its mitochondrial functions without the power of the white light behind all motion, which is unified. And it's the division of that unification of that white light into the color spectrum that produces the life-death sequences that we call reality, but don't quite understand there's a reality behind reality. And that's what the mystics of this world do. They've inspired great religions. They've inspired incredible philosophical movements. And they also bring new knowledge to man. And knowledge doesn't stop with the Christ, and it doesn't stop with the Romans. It doesn't stop with the church, and it certainly doesn't stop with science. So typically arrogance is thinking that man has it all figured out, that our great institution of science has it all figured out. Well, you don't, And if you did, balance would be the payday. That would be the reciprocal, which is the meaning end of it. As Nietzsche wrote, there's the will to power and the will to meaning. How many people pursue meaning and how many people pursue power? And there's your dichotomy, which produces the leftist movements, is the pursuit of power, where what produces the more artistic and self-unfoldment and the individual champion is the will to meaning. And I would rather mean something to myself than have power unto myself, because that power is not my power. It's the power others give me because they're afraid of me. And so when you go through your life and your entire self-motivation is the pursuit of power, it's the pursuit of the external, which is not reality. Reality is not itself without the internal recognition of meaning. You can certainly have power, but when you have meaning, you truly have power, because then your power isn't to pursue other people's power, it's to express your own. And that is the golden mean of which underlies all of the religious texts, is to manifest your Creator. I mean, if you are a creator, then, and you truly understand the power behind motion, which is at 90 degrees to all motions, is that power. That's where you'll find God. Again, the horizontal, you turn that awareness vertical, and bingo, you just discovered your source of power. And at that point, and with enough contemplation, you can command the horizontal. The horizontal can never command the vertical. And that's what the will to power is. It's the desire of the horizontal awareness, the thoughts after knowing, which are filled with unbalanced people. Everybody who's unbalanced fills a position of power that is used to build the communist systems of the world. Because they're unbalanced, they are promoted to the top positions. And then what are the effects of that? LA burns to the ground, the fire trucks aren't available, but there's plenty of LGBTQ rainbow sidewalks everywhere, but there's no water in the fire hydrants. Do you need more examples of unbalance? I mean, so it's really easy to see that, again, it comes down to foundational understandings and understandings of what is your purpose here. Are you here for power over others? Or are you here to share your power through the meaning that you found through expressing God and the Creator through your own self, through your body, which is a reflection? Your body is a recording of your thinking, right? So if your thinking is balanced, that's because you know how to think. You cannot act how to think, and you cannot think how to know, but you can know how to think and act. That's a saying I came up with.
I know, I like that a lot.
After you realize this kind of stuff, and again, you're operating from vertical awareness. You command matter. You command your body to fulfill divine ideas and to crystallize your thoughts into forms that are, what are considered to be artistic. And it doesn't matter if anybody else likes it or not. You don't have to worry about that. All you have to do is know that you've created something that didn't exist before you created it. And if you work knowingly with the Creator in all that you do, and Russell called that moment-to-moment awareness of the power source within you, that is God powering you. The devil doesn't power anything. It tears it down. It's like saying the senses power the universe. Well, they don't. Knowing powers the universe. That's how things are what they are, because they all know what they're supposed to be. Whereas humanity's been freed from instinct control, or God control, as Russell would say. And so we have to figure out what we want to be. But therein is a conundrum as well. It's a long journey from the blackness of the jungle to the mountaintop, But the point of the journey is not to arrive. We'll eventually get there, and as Russell said, humanity will achieve the pinnacle of its divine purpose for which it was created, and the Earth will roll off to where Mars used to be, and Venus will roll into the position of where the Earth was a billion years ago, and the man ideal will replay itself over again. This is the Goldilocks zone where life and humanity can exist, and they would even go on to say that there's many places in the universe that are planets that are full of nothing but geniuses. And I think I'd like to have a vacation in the next lifetime on one of those planets, because I'm trying to earn my wings, as it were.
Yeah, I think we got a spot reserved for sure.
Let's hope.
Like Russell says too, and like it's all earned. Like everything is earned that we have through all of our previous incarnations. So I definitely know that we're gonna have a nice seat at some point later on from all this hard work. And it's funny to even just to acknowledge that this is work. That this journey is like a humongous amount of work, but it doesn't feel like it because you can't really like see it like that in the same way that the world sees work. So. Yeah, it's nice accepting that. And I think that too, like when the world figures it out, we'll be able to tell. So like like right now, you can tell they haven't figured it out yet. So once we do figure it out, we will be able to tell. So and that, because that's the evidence, like you're saying, the evidence will be as the individual, and it will be with the world based on what you know and what you think is going to be how you act. And my example of cause and effect, because that's really what we're discussing here, is like a child can't give birth to the mother, and that will just never ever happen. It's like a one-way cause and effect direction. So trying to reverse that through inversion, you're not going to get anything, of benefit. All we're going to get is consequences. So after enough pain, that's the decision point of no return, where we stop doing that. And it has to be enough pain though. So
that's why Russell said all those things are good in the end. Right. Because it's the painful part of existence, the self-imposed suffering and the self-created evil that man does to himself. He hurts himself and he calls it evil, sin, and shame. That's good at the end of the day, because that's what will teach him through his own experience of the unbalanced effects of pain and suffering. That's what teaches him to find God in the fulcrum within himself, so that his effects of motion will be in balance and will have the exact debit to the credit, so that at the end of the day, like the bank ledger must be zero in order for there to be a balanced transaction. And if you can look at it any way you want, but every thought, every choice that a human being makes, if it's in balance, then it's good. Even if and he would also say this, Russell, he would say, nature, not man, holds the right to all reactions. And people often think, well, a bus full of school children went off a cliff and they all died, why did God do that or allow that to happen? But does anybody ask who was the mechanic working on the brakes who didn't tighten the brake pad down, or forgot to put the bolt back on the tire? I mean, it's everybody's so quick to blame the creator when all the creator's doing is managing with impeccability the reactive, reflective nature of the choices of us human beings, and that's the perfection of the creator. He cannot give the reflection to you that is not the exact reaction, pound for pound and color for color, weight for weight. That's not the perfect reflection of your choice. And that's a hard lesson in responsibility. And I think the religions have yet to learn it. Science is aloof from that. We can just keep, we're going to restart 3 Mile Island and power AI plants. And, the dream is to replace God with AI. That's because then they can have the still small voice is no longer God. It's a microchip implant. And we'll just tell this guy what we want him to do. We'll become the voice of God. Now, what more greater example of the will to power is there than that?
Yeah.
Talk about being disconnected. And that isn't a union with reality. That's a union with insanity, and they're going for it because that's what they want. And those are the people that have gravitated toward the top of the structure, and it's a fantasy structure, and it's built on lies. And that's the beauty of it, Kyle, is that we both know that lies will never be a firm foundation and they will collapse because that's what they're designed to do. In fact, they're not even designed. It's not even a design. It's ignoring the design. The great architect, as Masons call the creator, would not design a universe where lies could overrule the truth. Because then we wouldn't even be able to discern anything if that's the case. Because, many people have tried throughout the years to create kingdoms based on lies, but they've all fallen. And that's the same symptom that the Russells pointed out. 21 civilizations is actually probably more than 30 now that have all fallen for the same reasons, because the lies become what people perceive to be the truth, think is the truth, but at the end of the day, it's not. And nature and God's reactive, his basically fulfilling the reflection to the T is what people don't understand. And so the empires crumble, and these desires of world power and control crumble because they're built from false foundations. And lies, again, once you tell one, and I know this personally, once you tell one, you need 2 or 3 more to cover the first one. And then you've got to create more to cover the 2 or 3, 4 more that you used to cover the first one, and it's exponential. And no matter how good of a liar you are, and I was pretty damn good. I caused myself a world of pain on several different occasions. But when you realize that, it's as if you're creating a shadow within yourself, and you can't have the light and the shadow in balance if one's always competing against the other. You would have to embrace the shadow as a part of yourself, but also embrace the light, and that I think is the vertical awareness that's required to then proceed toward balance, and a life of meaning with the correct use of power. It's a nice analogy, power and meaning.
Yeah.
But the reflection that God offers us is not a punishment. It's the promise of justice in a true universe of the just and the creator that I don't want to say rules, but make sure the checks and balances all eventually return to zero. It's a perfect system. and you can't evade it, no matter how magnificent you think you are, your ego, whatever it is that, and there's good sides of ego and bad. Again, there's no just one side of anything. There's always a dualism that's centered by a center line, which is where I come up with the word triality or trialism versus dualism. And I did a series on my Substack called Triality Explained. It's 3 parts. Imagine that.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a really good one that goes more into this idea of how this isn't a duality but rather a triality, which is scientifically accurate.
Yeah, Russell helped with that huge amount. The 1 and then the 2, and now it's 3. It's done. It's as simple as that.
It's totally based on his work. He never used the word triality, but it fits. It makes perfect sense to me, and so I like to say I think I coined the term, because when I came up with it in 2010, I searched immediately on Google and found 0 references for the word at all.
Yeah, I haven't heard it.
And now it's everywhere. There's companies called Triality Communications and this and that. It's like, but
yeah, I always notice through with the religions, you have all the different Trinity archetype, and every single one, there's always like a Trinity idea there, and I think that was that's being like intuited of the triality nature of the universe. And in terms of God not being able to punish and people not knowing, saying how could God do this? How could God do that? I like to say that there's only one thing impossible for God, and that's to not be the way that it is.
yeah,
It cannot not do exactly the way it's going to do things, which is maintain balance. And there's nothing that anyone can do to break that law. God himself itself cannot even break that law. So I think the hubris necessary to go after God and try to replace it, it's just, he's got to be sitting back laughing so hard at this, these people who are trying to do this and replace God with man in that sense, instead of becoming God man.
Yeah, it's their lifelong dream to take God's place and be exalted in the same way. But yeah, you're 100% right on. I mean, God can't be anything other than what it is, which is why it's been called, the Nazarene called it, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the light, right? And that's all that God is. It's that being itself. And that being can be our being for the asking. Russell's telling us this. It doesn't mean man becomes God. Man, like the name Michael, means like to God, the very word Michael. So Michelangelo, for instance, are his paintings like to God? Of course they are. I mean, the hand of man, impotently scared to fully reach out, where God's fingers like, come on, boy, you can touch God. You can be part of that eternal being, but you must right yourself, you must realize certain things, and then you must hold those moral states within yourself, exalt them, and express them. That's like to being God. But you cannot be God. Nobody can be God. It's like saying I can be the whole universe and control all its motions, all heartbeats, all everything everywhere. That's a God complex. You'll never become the creator. You're a part of it, but we individuate from it in order to experience life and what we call reality, which there's really 2 kinds of reality. There's the reality behind motion, which is at 90-degree angles to all motions, scientifically speaking, through natural science, Russell science. And then there's the reality of the dualistic nature of the expression of that division of oneness into two-ness, into three-ness, into four. Where do you think the heartbeat comes from? It comes from the nature of one. That's why it splits into 2. There's your heartbeat, bump, bump. But the silence centers each of those expressions, which is a 3. There's your triality again. You know, the very nature of music is a 1-2, and then a 1-2-3, 1-2-3 in the waltz, and then rock and roll. 1-2-3-4, right? And then jazz. 1-2-3-4-5-6-7-8-9-10-11-12-13-14-15. You know, you keep dividing the meters further and further. And Russell, that's why he didn't like jazz. He's like, it's too far from the heartbeat, too far away. You're getting further and further away from God, and it doesn't make any sense. But none of our parents liked rock and roll when I was a kid growing up. You know, they're like, what is that noise? Can't you listen to Frank Sinatra? Which I actually started to finally later in life, but you got to get older, out of your rebellious phase, you know.
Oh yeah, and then now with the ADHD, it's got to be super complex, super complicated polyrhythms going all over the place, you know, to stimulate those senses. You know, they can't handle not being stimulated. They can't handle the silence, you know, and the simplicity. So it's cool to be aware of that, and then you can still enjoy it too if you want to. But it's not. Yeah. It's all about that balance, like how Russell would say that it's not. You know, he's not trying to like demean it or say that you should never do anything that the body wants you to do or something like that. It's just balancing it out, you know.
Exactly. Yep. There's all kinds of music, though. You know, that's one of the gifts God gives us. Is every culture in existence has some form of music unto its own, and we can also appreciate the music of other cultures. But symphonic music, you know, I couldn't listen to just symphonies by themselves forever. You know, I need the rock and roll. I need the bit of Rush or the, you know, good stuff I grew up on. There's lots of forms of expression, and, you know, it can all be inspired and expressed in very creative ways. And I think the best stuff really comes from, you know, those who work knowingly with that innate creative nature within, that beingness, you know, that brings out, because the inner ear and the inner eye, you know, this is what I like to use as proof that science just doesn't, it completely disregards the third strand, which is the fulcrum of all things. It's focused on the dualisms in many ways, the hot and the cold, but not the average mean central, you know, unification line. This one quick example is you don't hear actual notes or music inside your head. So what are you hearing that with? Can you hear Beethoven's Fifth Symphony right now inside your mind? How does it go? Dun, 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 dun. I hear it. You hear it. Everybody watching this hears it. But it's not your ears that are hearing that. So what the hell is it? Can you see yourself standing on the moon right now? Close your eyes for a second. See yourself standing on the moon with a flag that says Walter Russell rocks. I see it, but you're not actually there. So where are you seeing this? What is seeing this if it's not your two eyeballs? So do we have eyes and ears that people don't usually account for? Of course we do. Russell said the inner ears and the inner eyes. You know, they call it the imagination. But that and God are one in a sense. You know, and that's where we pull out the incredible things that surround us that we call man-made items and things. Were all first things we saw with the eyes that couldn't see and the ears that could not hear. In other words, i.e. the senses. So science has no explanation for that. In fact, they leave consciousness at the door, as a Michael Tessarian might say. And they do it with extreme prejudice, and the effects are detrimental to the human race to not acknowledge the soul side or the spiritual side of the whole equation. One thing I loved about ninjutsu is what I learned when I was little, which also helped me a lot with the idea of triality, was they call it the triangle of life. And you're born into the lower left corner of the triangle in the physical. You progress to the mental, which is the lower right corner. And through the balance of the physical and mental, the two final angles appear to the spirit. And so your spirit is the capstone of the triangle, and they called that the triangle of life. And through hard training and then meditation, you work on the physical, the mental, and the spiritual equally, and that solidifies into that triangle. But yeah, I just think too, we're born into the physical, we develop mentally over time, and we pursue the spiritual by our acknowledgement of it, of all that is, and somebody like Russell, he brings you that capstone of spirituality like it was a school lesson, like you're literally in school, which is why they started that university. We have all these wonderful sciences, and many of them are very wonderful. I'm not going to down all of science, but without the spiritual angle, what is all the science in the world? Is it a will to power, or is there meaning in it? Does it actually help, or is it just a continual asking for donations to cure cancer when they have no intention of curing it? So, and that's how we find ourselves in these situations. How could a COVID happen? It couldn't happen with spiritual beings. Obviously, we're not very spiritual, then, are we?
No.
How many people were so quick to don the mask and stand 6 feet apart? My Lori and I never put one on. We'd hug people in Walmart we didn't even care what the reaction of other people were. That never crossed our minds. But I remember giving this little lady friend of ours, 86 years old, I think, or something like that. She's like, "Oh, Matt and Lori, how are you?" She didn't have a mask on either. We give her a big hug, and 20 people around the store are looking at us like we're lepers in a leper colony. It's like, what's wrong with you people? But to even divorce yourself from reality requires a healthy dose of lies and fantasy mixed together. Lies are the cause of fantasy. Now, there's 2 types of fantasy. There's fantasty fantasy, which inspires Lord of the Rings and Lions, Witches, and Wardrobes books. And then there's another kind of fantasy that wants to escape reality because it's terrified. The illusion must be real. COVID must be real.
Yeah.
We
the
must
shadows
all
on the wall in the cave, they have to be real.
That's the ancient lesson there, And so, again, I think everything is a balancing act. It's fine, fantasy, it's a lot of its imagination. I would rather have The Lord of the Rings than not have it, even though it's considered a fantasy novel,
right.
Because it brought great inspiration to me on many occasions. Probably the best trilogy movies ever made, Peter Jackson, and even though it wasn't 100% to the book, often the greatest critics are the ones who don't try it themselves.
Every time.
Just like teachers, if you can't do it, teach it instead.
Wow.
That's the beauty of the Russell science. It's as much hands-on, and the philosophy is as much mental and spiritual as hands-on. It's a balance of all 3 of those things in a perfect way. I think it's hard. It would be nearly impossible to express it any more perfectly, and that's what the message of the Divine Iliad did. It gave him the understanding of how, in The Secret of Light, he lists 3 parts of the book: omniscience, which is knowing; omnipotence, which is power. So knowing one's own power produces the omnipresence of a experiential universe. So it's all those 3 O's. The 3 O's, which is one thing I always acknowledge about God, is those 3 O's, and that's why there's 3 O's in our band name, OOTO, Order of the One. You could just as rightly call it omniscience, omnipotence, truth, and omnipresence. Could mean OOTO as well, and so the whole project is an acknowledgement of the divine, and we try our best to recreate, the inner rhythms and the lyrics that bring that sense of, in 432, I might add.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So orderoftheone.com, folks, if you're interested in checking more of that out.
Yeah, definitely check that out, guys. Yeah, that's the tripod balance. That's the most basic. For balance is 3. You need it.
Exactly. Yep.
Man, that was an awesome talk. I mean, we can keep going forever and ever. I was actually going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Is your favorite book The Secret of Light?
Yeah.
Nice.
I haven't met its equal yet.
I know.
That's my fantasties, and part of the reason I'm doing this series. But it just, when I think back to the life-changing qualities that it brought me, the realization of what it was, God 2.0. Somebody finally gave a definition to God that is more like God than not like God. And it's the way I knew God when I was a kid. And it was rekindled in the reading of that book. I'm like, this is the God that I knew as a child before man's God infested my brain and took me off the path of understanding, But so yeah, it was just getting back to the actual nature of true reality, you could say, which is and the way to tell does it work? Is it true? Is because the effects will be balanced if it is. If it's not, it's going to unbalance your life in some way, shape, or form. That's your gauge. We all have that gauge. Was this a good choice? Well, you went to jail. Was it a good choice? It's real simple, people. And that's why it's so difficult, I don't need priesthoods, and I don't need to go to confession. I don't need to tell a million different people my life's stories and shadows that have caused me harm and grief and suffering. When you realize that your own choices, choice points, whatever you want to call them, the effects must equal the cause. Oh, they always do. They can't help it. That's God's promise to us, is I will always give you an honest reflection of your choices. And if you're making good ones by God, you'll stay out of jail. You'll walk a more moral life. You won't have to lie to your wife about where you've been. You won't have to pretend that you're someone you're not. That's being real. What more real is there to be than honest with yourself? That doesn't mean you go out screaming in the streets, I did this when I was 20. It's more of just adopting a moral nature and commanding more of yourself to be more divine, like to God, if you will. And if you have to, I've had several people. There was that old saying, what would Jesus do? I had friends of mine, when I started changing my life after the reading of that book and realizing that what I do, my choices that I make, I don't have to suffer the effects of every wave. I can create my own waves. And if they're in balance, that will create waves of inspiration for others to enjoy. So they can enjoy the best parts of me, as opposed to those who had to not enjoy parts that, I didn't want to be responsible for. Right?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, when you start commanding your body to obey what you know in your mind, then you can't help but have balanced effects. And even in a room full of unbalanced people, they'll notice. And so my friends adopted this saying, what would Matt do?
Oh,
come on.
Nice.
Come on, guys. Don't put me up on any kind of pedestal. I never did like that. But a certain amount of humility has to come with this too. And we all can get overinflated from time to time, and that's just part and parcel, especially men in their 40s when they're kicking ass and taking names. They start, high and mighty, all of a sudden God's like,
yeah, take a seat.
Yep.
Time out.
Back to the trenches, boy. You got some more work to do. And often that'll come from others, it'll in relationships and things like that. I learned more about who I was through my relationship with my Lori. We're now celebrated 22 years together in October. And
God bless.
She taught me more about myself than, in fact, I credit her for saving my life. God knows where I'd be if I didn't have that mirror to hold myself up to myself. You know, and that's the power, revelationary power of relationships. Is that
Yeah, balanced matehood.
exactly? And yeah, so there's lessons in everything, and it all stems from and returns to one single word. And there's only one law you need follow in this universe, and if you follow it, you will live the tenets of all the highest moral standards, and that's the word balance. That's nature's one law, if you will, and that may be the single greatest thing Russell brought to this world, was the realization of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny how you can kind of interchange that with the word love, but they're so misunderstood, you know, that it can get confusing. So balance is honestly like a little bit better in that sense, because the word love is so misunderstood. But balance is, I mean, balance is balance. So
Yep. And they are interchangeable, Kyle. If you can say to your girlfriend, I balance you,
Yep.
instead
how
of the
you
word
check.
love, it's the same. But if you use the word love and you think in your mind, if I said I balance you, would it be true? And if it's not true, you got work to do. But yeah, I can say that
So
with
true.
Lori.
So true, man.
Yep.
And speaking of relationships, because we never talk about Lao Russell, and I've been actually diving really deep into Lao and realizing that
Yeah.
I kind of left her behind for like years and only focused on
Sure.
on Walter stuff. So I just bought Love the other day, and I'm like going through that with my girl. So
Well, that's
it's
great,
just like
because
all about
that's
it. Yeah,
you're gonna hear echoes of what we talked about just right there throughout
Yeah.
that whole entire work.
Yeah.
She was integral. She was the balance that, you know, Walter could say, I balance you, and she could say, I balance you back.
yeah,
And that was absolutely true. Without her, you wouldn't even have heard of the man, you know,
I
and
know,
as
it's
much
unbelievable.
unheard of as he was to begin with, you know, I like to refer to him as the most famous unknown man in the world.
yeah,
He's not as unknown as he was when I first Googled him. There were only 150 something references
I know.
to Russell, and 90% of those in 2008 when I Googled him were Walter Russell Mead, who's basically
Right, that's what I found. I remember
a
that.
left-wing politician, you know,
Look that up.
political
Yeah,
consultant. But yeah, the actual Walter Russell now, you Google him and there's millions of hits, and maybe I had something to do with that, maybe I didn't, but
I
the
would say
important
you
thing
did,
is
bro.
the
Definitely.
important thing is that people go study these mavericks of their own accord. You know, when the student is ready, the master appears, as they say, and I was definitely ready for the secret of light, but I didn't know it would be so life-changing. And I look back at the last, well, nearly 18 years of my life and think of what would it have been like without that, and I can't even imagine. As good as I am at imagining things, I can't even imagine what would it have been like. You know, I've been blessed repeatedly over and over, and you know, my happiness, my contentment with life isn't dependent on my hourly wage. I mean, I'm working construction right now, just to stay busy and keep things coming in, but it doesn't matter. You know, the quality of my life and the contentment that I have is there, whether I've got a bigger paycheck or a smaller one. It doesn't matter. It's there and it can't go away. So, you know, there is something to be said for that when you reach a point in life where you have that inner balance. It's not dependent on external circumstances. It's dependent on you maintaining it through your recognition and your moment-to-moment connection to, you know, the divine, which is God within us, the power source. If he's omnipresent, then he powers us. If he's not omnipresent, then he's a deadbeat God gallivanting off in some quadrant of the universe, and everybody's waiting desperately for him to return one day. What kind of God is that?
I know.
You know, I can't imagine for the life of me why anyone would believe that an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God would be like that.
Right. Or make itself mysterious and make it, because people think that you can't know what it is. That's why I love the Russell stuff. And because I found the secret of light, and I was like, okay, this is too complicated. I know it's true, but it's too complicated. What else? And then I found the home study course, And then I went through that. And then in the beginning, meditation scientifically explained. And he's like, listen, I'm going to explain God to you scientifically right here. Nice and simple for you. And I was like, awesome. Thank you. And because it should be simple. And that idea that we can't know anything, Russell just like kind of brushed that completely away and was just like, no, you can definitely know things. And if you do that, then the results will speak for themselves, because God has to be love. It can't be something that's not love, or that then, I feel like there wouldn't even be anything.
Yeah. If God can't be unbalanced.
Right.
So whenever we find ourselves in a state of unbalance or experiencing an unbalance of some kind, we question God's faith to us. And 99% of the time we bring that upon ourselves, world conflict, things of that nature. And we're in a state, you got to remember too, that we're not going to manifest a type 1 civilization on this planet probably for at least another couple, 2,000 to 3,000 years.
Yep.
And Walter even said that himself. 10 years after his massive divine illumination in 1921, he had another one in 1931, June. And he wrote down 10 pages, and then 2 days later, another 10 pages. And the first 10 pages were him shaking his fist at God. Why didn't you told me this to release the universal one, and they all laughed at it and threw it in the wastebasket, scoffed at it. I did what you said. I went before these scientists and speaking tour to all these different places, worked with Westinghouse scientists and showed them transmutation, yet they all crapped on it, So it's basically him complaining that first 10 pages. The next 10 pages was God's more or less, and this is how I break it into understanding, but someday this will be released. It's up to you.
Yeah, I need to see that.
But basically God says, look, son, you're the heralder of but the first 50 years of a 3,000-year-long process.
Damn.
Don't get excited. You did your job, And when I read that, this was like 2018 or 19. I'm thinking to myself, man, I got to get this out to the whole world. The whole world has to know about this, And when I read that, I felt like a great weight was lifted off my shoulders. I don't have to save the planet, and I really felt up to those years, everybody needs to hear who this guy is. And
that's what I did with everybody that I met. Everyone who knows me, they know Walter Russell because of me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, we get excited. We get filled up with, ambitions and goals and things like that. But at the end of the day, you have to have your times of rest too. And that was Russell, his stress,
I know. I can't even imagine God being him. And like knowing these things and doing that, like it's just when you imagine actually being like a man with that and doing that, it's like I can't even, just the fact that he got it done is just incredible in and of itself. But then also to not get any results and to actually get crucified, that's not the response we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's, again, just the out breath, guys, don't forget that is as important as the in breath. It's rest, reflection, the knowing. That's why Russell said the nights were more important than the days, because the nights are where you get the knowledge of what to do the next day, especially when you're working moment to moment with God. It's, which is our birthright. If God created us, why would he disown us? There's no disowning. You can't be not a part of what created you. It's like the David statue. Modern man, as a David statue, says, my creator has left me. He's gone. But you are, David, the result of the creator's, you are the creation of the creator's will and desire. So you are that which created you. You just forgot. And you think you're made of marble or stone and that the weather has taken its toll on you. But you forget that the hand that sculpted you is eternal. And that's how often do we forget that? How many religions teach you that? That you are the creation of the creator. And you, like God, can keep creating. That's why Russell said we live in a creating universe, not a created one.
Right.
And change is the only constant. It all changes, and then it becomes like itself again after it changes. But it's all itself manifesting as self. And that's the beauty of it. And it's in perfect balance. Everything we call violence, destruction is still perfect balance, whether you like it or not. The difference is that which knows itself to be divine and purposely created by God will fulfill its manifestation purpose in a far greater way than those who do not. And that's, again, comes back to free will. God doesn't force us to manifest his nature. He sends messengers over time immemorial to influence, to inspire great poets, even great scientists, things of that nature, to take the toil away from man, to give him more time to reflect on who he is as a being and to become more like God, which is to become balanced. You can become unbalanced, right? Do drug addicts, are they born drug addicts, or do they become drug addicts? Lots of things are becoming and unbecoming. I know many alcoholics who became alcoholics and then unbecame alcoholics by joining AA. So there is a lot of becoming and unbecoming, which you must factor in, but it's not all becoming, and it's not all simply being. There's a balance between the be of coming and the be of inging.
Nice.
But yeah, it's, again, the B word, balance, BALANCE, number one. If you focus on that and you adopt it as not only a survival strategy, but a strategy for life and a philosophy that is a living philosophy, then you can gauge every choice you make, and its effects will be the mere reflection that nature and God provides you in order to tell if that was a good choice or not. And when you take that into account, your choices, if they're balanced, you'll find out. Don't believe me. Experience it for yourself, folks, because that's that's how the universe was created, to reflect that which thinks. And when it's balanced, we call it nature. When it's out of balance, we call it evil or devil or demons or the New World Order, whatever. There's many terms for it. But the manifestations of evil are simply unbalanced things, and that's why I want to add that definition underneath evil. Unbalance would be a great definition to define evil going forward for the modern man that needs it. We need to step away from the post-modernity man into, and not even modern man, how about just man being man?
Yeah.
Just be what you were created to be and express the creator to the degree that you can.
I like how Russell puts it. He calls it God man. That's the new race.
Yeah, men that love God instead of fear God.
Right.
Who the hell told us to fear God?
Yeah.
The intermediaries,
the scammers,
those who want our money, right? You must fear God, and by the way, give us some money, 10% of your income, right?
We'll make sure you're nice and safe. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll teach this stuff to your kids so that they fear God too, instead of loving God. And if you fear the man that created you, would you not fear who you are as well? And is not fear the biggest lie? False evidence appearing real?
Absolutely.
But,
yeah, and if God does it, that means it's perfect. So you're going to like it. That's why I want you to be like it, because it's the best way to be balanced. It's the best way of thinking. God has it. And that's why
no other way could create a universe of such splendor, such luminescence, and incredible, inspiring things like a walk through nature, or
looking at the stars.
Yeah. I mean, those are the things that you're looking at, reflections of God's thinking, which is truly perfect. That's why nature doesn't collapse, like man's civilizations do. But
Yeah, I know. Only the result of his eternal meditation can the universe sustain itself. It sounds like a big task, but I'm sure it's no big deal for God somehow.
it's love expressing itself in a balanced continuum, and it's eternal. It can't be what it's not. It's the ecstatic love God. The ecstatic love nature of God itself is that eternal balance, which is so ecstatic that all it does is it's the light of truth, which divides into the dualistic nature, but always maintains its image through its own light, so that its reflection is always perfect. Until he gives the freedom to certain parts of his creation, like humanity,
Right.
to have what's called free will. And there couldn't be evil without free will.
Right.
We don't see, herds of deer running around, creating massive wars or chemical biological weapons, or everything just is what it is, under instinct control, under God control, excepting man. He's the form that was basically God's test. I'm going to release them from instinct control, from my control, and see if they can manifest me, if my creation is worthy.
Yeah, that's God's great idea of man, and it's like a version of God, but as like a person. So it's one of the greatest inventions that you can imagine.
And how do you know God loves us? Because he would do that.
Right.
He would give man the chance to deny him,
That's
to
why I'm
make
saying
AI to replace him. Right? How could he not love us if whether he knows the outcomes or not? But again, AI is not the truth, and neither is man's ideas of God in terms of orthodoxy. Are they correct? If they were, the effects would be far different than what we're experiencing in today's world. But my only advice is seek that inner peace within yourself, find that, and learn to listen to that still small voice, because that is the voice of, your conscience is the creator's conscience. It's that voice which seems like your voice, but really isn't. But it tells you, and it often tells you after you've done something dumb. Like, you should have listened to me. Think of how many times if we'd have done that, the troubles we wouldn't have to have experienced. But that's part of the plan too, is that we must understand what unbalance is to seek balance in the first place. So.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful how loving God is in terms of, because the example that I have is like your favorite dessert. It's like your favorite dessert. But with a dessert that you get to eat in the world, you can only have so much of it before you start getting sick, and before you start getting sick of it. But God, in its perfection, is the only thing that you can choose continuously and never get sick of it, never get tired of it, and it actually will taste better to you over time the more that you choose it. And so that's evidence of God's love right there, that you get to choose that for eternity. And I can't imagine a better situation where you get to just choose it forever and ever and ever if you want to, but you don't have to. So it's just a beautiful situation, and you really can be lift your awareness up to that level. And humble yourself, because that's really what it's about. Like Russell with the success laws, humility. And it feels like that arrogant voice inside us, where it's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like I'm the one. Like I'm in control. I'm this. I'm that. I get to say what's right and wrong for me and for the world. Humbling yourself down into realizing that there is it's like the most sci-fi thing that you can imagine, like a real being that is conscious, that is infinite, that's intelligent, that is love itself. I like to think of it actually as space itself, right? It's the thing that's connecting everything, and it's also the thing that's inside, centering everything, in terms of how you said before, when you're in your mind and you're hearing things, that infinite space that's within us, that's the zero fulcrum that's inside and it's outside. So, and it's also the like nothing, because God has to be like nothing particularly, which that allows it to be all the potential and the reality itself before it's manifested. So, yeah, it's a great setup.
We are the space of mind compressed into a body to express itself as such. And we're free to express however we want toward power, toward meaning, toward being, toward becoming. We can express it in 100 gazillion different ways, which are infinite in themselves. But those who understand the nature of their self can certainly express more of what we say is our true self, which we are divine. The divine man is a very ancient idea. Probably the first shamans in the world experienced hints of it, and then you get thousands of years later into the poets who would express some of the most divine. You take a Whitman or others. There's many. Great authors, great inventors, great artists are all mirroring that which is that inner domain of God's perfection. Man is a perfect creation. That's the symbology of a Jesus, the Nazarene, is a perfect creation to remind man that was the point. I and my Father are one. We're not two. We're one. And like I am, you can also be, if you simply realize it, And perhaps that's what he truly meant.
And God's inside joke, too, is that we are already one with it. We can't not be one with it. So the feeling that we can be separated from it, which is what the religion does, they separate everything. And they say, no, only that guy was one with it. You can't do that. When the guy said that you can do that. And it's just funny that not only can you do that, you can't not do that. You are already one with it because we're in space and space is inside you. So we're one with the Creator for eternity. And I just love Russell for highlighting that. All you have to do is become aware of that. That makes it easy. Imagine trying to actually connect yourself with God somehow. Where are you going to go? How do you even begin that journey? So luckily the hard part is already done for us. And all we have to do is be aware of it.
And that comes through many realizations.
Yeah.
Again, can a lamp unplug itself and emit light without a connection to its source? This is the hubris of man. I am a light without any electricity. Look at me go in the dark. It's the moose running with the stick and it impales itself on it. Mm-hmm. That cartoon, I can't remember, wasn't Ren and Stimpy, but it was the blue moose that impaled himself running down the path with his own stick. That's how I think of man. And he's young. He's a very young being, but a lamp can't light a room without being plugged into the power source, and neither can a man light his family or himself without recognition of that which provides him that power. And so, we've got many millennia of unfolding to do yet before we realize even the potential that's there. But it's discussions like this, and I thank you, Kyle, for the chance to be able to speak with you about it, that, we learn to command that which is our body because we vertically are aware of the knowing mind and power and presence within us. That just ask and you'll receive. It's there. As much of it as you want is there. But you can commit great evil as much as you can do great good with it. The question is what you're doing balanced or not? And that's the fulcrum of your gauge. If you need to gauge it to know, the fruits will always be in balance with a good choice. They will be desirable fruits. A poor choice will always be undesirable fruits or spoiled or rotten fruit. And God made sure to set the universe up that way. And we see that everywhere these days. So don't add to it, people. Bring some good. Bring some balance to the world that much.
When is enough going to be enough? That's the question. So Matt, thanks for talking to me, bro. That was fantastic. That was really fantastic. And I'm honestly hoping that we get to talk again and dive deeper into these different areas, because this area of study is quite massive, and there's just so much to be said when it comes to tying in Russell with life that I feel like there's a lot more nice conversations to have.
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to check out my Reflections on the Secret of Light series on Substack. $7 a month. You can try it for a month. It's $70 a year. That helps support the work I do, and I'll keep producing. You know, it's an endeavor of love to share it, and I appreciate everybody that does, and of course mattpresti.com for all my other work, as well as ordertheone.com for my musical work right now in the current project.
Yeah, and we'll have links in the description so you can check that out. Feel free to check that out. And yeah, I would suggest doing that because yeah, Matt Presti was one of the people who helped me understand Walter Russell. And yeah, without this guy right here, I don't know where I would be either. So yeah,
well, you did the work, brother. You did the work. I just sent an inspiring, note out to the world, but you did all the work. I can't take credit for that.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll chat soon, man.
Okay. Take care, man.
All right. See you, brother.
Bye-bye.
Peace.